Started. Say hello to the people.
Nice. Hello, people. Welcome to the Buffalo Doge pre-show.
Okay.
We're here to audit the City of Buffalo's American Rescue Plans, which has been in the news lately because there's been lots of news lately.
Hey, what if people think it's the dog talking?
Well, yeah. What if I could,
If you did a Monty Python with the
you
dog's
know,
mouth moving.
it would be sad if yeah, the dog got more viewers than me actually speaking my voice. Huh. What if you could get? There's got to be that with AI where you could have.
Oh, I'm sure there's an app or something that you could use that for. If you look into it, I'm sure you'll find something.
Actually, I used AI to help design this logo. This wasn't AI didn't design this logo, but AI came up with a design that was like this that then I copied.
Huh.
So I copied the AI.
Huh.
What have you been hearing in the news?
Uh, that the amount of homeless people in America has increased.
I did see something like that too. Well, one of the topics I'm going to cover is after the audit is the Bray Miller Market downtown. One of the
Oh, they're thinking of turning into a police station.
yeah, that was the other big topic.
Isn't that interesting? It goes from being a place that sells food to a place that governs people.
Yeah, well, I think that encapsulates like the current state of the city like perfectly. Is yeah, the fact that they're turning a grocery store another police station,
Hmm.
and some of the discussion they were talking about how they're going to turn the commercial freezers into office space.
Hmm.
Yeah, people were going to be allowed to have tours. If you wanted a tour, you would be able to get a tour of the new police station.
Everything seems to be in order.
Okay,
When you see that it says on the air, you're on the air, okay?
okay, perfect. Hello, Think Twice Radio, and welcome to Buffalo Doge, an audit of the City of Buffalo's American Rescue Plans. So, welcome to our show. So, we appreciate you tuning in on this New Year's Eve. I think there's been some. So actually, today is technically. I mean, what time is it now? It's about 8 o'clock now. So we technically have 4 hours for the City of Buffalo to amend their American Rescue Plan. So hopefully, all the amendments get in and are finalized. But that's something we're going to dive into today. So the big topic for today's show at Buffalo Doge is going to be the City of Buffalo's American Rescue Plan, kind of an audit into that funding, because that's, like I said, today is the deadline. This deadline's been approaching for a couple of years, and we've had our elected officials and city governments kind of scrambling here at the end. Also, I'm going to cover, I spoke actually yesterday at the City of Buffalo's Civil Service Committee meeting, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that item. So I was able to file an item and speak on that briefly, so I'll provide an update on that, and then also some other items. So also in the news this week was the Bray Miller Market being turned into a police station. We have a viewer, so I'm recording this live on Facebook. So if you're watching live, feel free to drop a comment in the chat. And if you're watching this later, yeah, drop a comment. And yeah, we've got Uncle John's tuned into the chat. So he says great logo. So thank you. Yes, this is the Buffalo Doge logo. So taking a lot of inspiration from the Department of Government Efficiency and Doge. So it's actually like an online meme. So it started with the cryptocurrency Dogecoin, and it's kind of now expanded. The Doge meme has, taken on the moniker Department of Government Efficiency. So most people are familiar with, the federal level, which is kind of being led right now by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. They're kind of the leaders of the federal level. And I'm not affiliated with them at all, but definitely taking inspiration from the whole government efficiency initiatives. And I'd love to see a Doge chapter pop up in every municipality, every state in the union, because I think If there's any encapsulation of why Buffalo needs a Doge, a government efficiency, it is probably this recent American Rescue Plan debacle. But even calling it a debacle is being very kind to the English word debacle. It's kind of quite hard to encapsulate what's been going. So maybe I'll start with where we are currently, and then maybe back it up to kind of an overview. So I want to do kind of a long form just discussion of the American Rescue Plan. So I think it's important. So essentially, I'm recording this on the last day of 2024, and this is the last day, right, of the federal deadline for municipalities to allocate their funding. So they can obligate it. They can, up until 4 hours from now, where I'm recording, they can put the money into buckets. But after today, once that money is allocated, after starting in 2025, they can no longer move that money around. So the American Rescue Plan, this was started, right? So this was part of the COVID pandemic. So just like, they printed a bunch of money and they gave it out to not just, individuals, PPP loans, but a lot of municipalities, many municipalities around the nation got funding. So American Rescue Plan funding to deal with the impacts of the pandemic. So each municipality got funding from the federal government, and it was to address the impacts of the pandemic. And I think it's really been eye-opening. Here we are in this last week. So this was 2001, I think. August 2021 is when the city of Buffalo got their funding. It's when the Common Council adopted their plan. So this is 3+ years where they had a plan. And what we experienced this past week was our lawmakers scrambling at the deadline to figure out. They've been amending the ARP plan because they've been trying to figure out. And it was really eye-opening that nobody in the entire building seemed to know where the money is. And keep in mind, the city of Buffalo got $331 million. So this isn't, $3 that somebody lost, in a pillow or in a couch pillow. This is, $331 million. It's a lot of money. It's kind of hard to make it go away. A couple issues here, I guess. The biggest issue that the city of Buffalo had is that, our mayor has vacated his post. So Mayor Byron Brown in August of this year, was it August or September, he stepped aside and resigned as mayor. So the charter of the city of Buffalo, this isn't like the U.S. Constitution where it outlines, an order of succession and someone ascends to the vacancy of the mayor. Essentially, it just designates who acts as the mayor. So technically, the city of Buffalo has no mayor right now. We have an acting mayor. So the council president used to be a citywide elected position, but due to a charter revision in 2002, that changed to, city of Buffalo right now has 9 individual council districts, similar to like states, and each of those districts gets a representative. So right now we have the South District council member, who I believe only had like 4,000 votes in his election for his South District. He is now the acting mayor of the city. So that's one of the issues. One of the many issues that I see is that, here we are at the deadline, and the city's mayor, who was elected by the people, vacated his post. So we don't have any leadership. And I think one of the problems with the American Rescue Plan was administration. So really, it's I think when you look at the $331 million, the city of Buffalo allocated less than 1%, a very small portion, to actual administration. So it seems to me, from my perceptions, that the American Rescue Plan was a really small operation. Very few people were involved, which kind of made it very hard from administrative. But essentially, here we are in the last week of December, and the Buffalo Common Council. So the acting mayor on December 23rd, he posted the 6th Amendment. So multiple amendments have been made, but on this end of the week, or the end of December, the Common Council was asked to vote on a 6th Amendment to the plan. And this essentially took money from previously obligated or previously allocated buckets and moved it from things like negative economic impacts into revenue replacement. So I guess to back up a little bit, the American Rescue Plan, it's a federal program, and there's really 7 categories that municipalities could obligate their funds to. And one of those is revenue replacement. So revenue replacement, what does that mean? It means just lost revenue, or the theory was that the impact was going to cause harms to the economy, and if cities were struggling, or cities saw if they lost revenue that they would have been expected to have without the pandemic, they could use American Rescue Plan fundings to fill that gap. And I think it is a gap, because essentially, right, there's been language when you see it reported in the media. You see language. Sometimes it's called budget gaps. Using funds to plug budget gaps. Other times they say using the revenue replacement to fill budget holes. And I prefer the term gap. I think it's a more honest kind of assessment of what they're doing. A hole makes it seem, when you talk about a budget hole, it seems like you had a budget and then there was a hole, so something fell out from underneath you. Which what I actually think is a more kind of accurate description is a gap. So what a city's essentially been doing is they've been overprojecting revenues. So they've been creating numbers that aren't based in reality. They're way too high. And then it gets to the end of the year and the city has been saying, we have, a budget hole, which isn't true. It's not that, any revenue was lost. It's that the revenue in the first place in the original budget was unrealistic and you didn't hit your target. So essentially, we've had a few years here now where the city's been using American Rescue Plans to fill that gap, create that, get the budget in order. And we have a comment here from Mick, so thanks for tuning in. He says, there is no rescue plan. And I think that is a good encapsulation of what this whole process was. So when this American Rescue Plan was given to the city, right, the city got $331 million. And all the lawmakers, all the legislators, the mayor, kept echoing, this is transformational. This is transformational change for the city. This is going to transform the city. This is, a really, transformational moment in our city's history of $331 million to spend on negative economic impacts, to address our infrastructure, to do a bunch of things. And yeah, there is no rescue plan is a good thing, because essentially, I think it's, by my calculation, my calculation is my calculation, but that's the thing is we've got to the end here, and it doesn't seem like anyone in the building knows how much we've allocated. My allocation, which essentially took the original plan, which allocated $100 million for revenue replacement, and then in Amendment 4, they moved $60 million over to revenue replacement, and then in Amendment 6 and Amendment 7, that number's Amendment 6, they did something where they moved $19 million to revenue replacement, but then in the from category, there's a 1.5. So I'm unclear if there's $17 million. And then finally, Amendment 7, which was adopted yesterday, they took $2 million away. So my calculation shows that they've allocated $177.5 million towards revenue replacement. And then another $11 million towards premium pay. So premium pay was premium pay for city hall workers who worked during the pandemic. So when you total that, that's like nearly $200 million. So essentially almost 2/3 of this rescue plan. It's saying they stole the money is not, I don't know if I like that terminology. I think flushing it down the toilet is definitely the analogy or metaphor I think is most appropriate, because this money that was supposed to go towards infrastructure, so things, one of the allocated categories they had was replacing old lead pipes, so old water lines. So that money, could have been spent to, and one of the issues, Buffalo has is lead water lines. We have old lead water lines that need to be replaced, right? And that's very expensive to do. This money could have been used to do things, not just that, but things like that. And essentially, nearly 2/3 of the money went to city hall budgets and premium pay for workers. So, I don't know if it's stealing. I think maybe the more radicals will say that it was stolen. And I think, who knows, we might see here the Common Council and people have been calling for the U.S. Inspector General and the New York State Attorney General to investigate, because I think there genuinely might have been some theft, because genuinely no one knows where the money is. But even if it was properly allocated, spending nearly 2/3 of this, transformational money on, again, plugging budget gaps, so hitting revenue numbers that aren't based in reality, and then paying city hall workers to work. It just feels like a bit of a tragedy. And I don't think that's doing it justice because there's a lot to it. So I think, and even, I mean, one of the biggest tragedies of this is you had local organizations being promised money, and it wasn't, the city was giving organizations or told organizations they were giving them money. And I think a lot of the narrative in the media has been this is the organization's money versus the city money, and which is kind of true, but it really, you need to think of it as the city is giving organizations money to address issues in the city of Buffalo. So it's kind of like the city of Buffalo is collaborating with these organizations to address city issues. So you had, and I during some of my research, I found an actual technical assistance webinar that the city's Office of Strategic Planning held. And essentially what you had the city doing was you had, them, right? So the original budget had $100 million of revenue replacement. That means $231 million wasn't supposed to go to a revenue replacement. So a lot of community organizations were promised money, and essentially it appears that, in all the feedback from the community organizations has been that, they were made to jump through hoops. So very cumbersome requests for proposals, grant proposals, developing KPIs, key performance indicators, applying, reapplying, just really burdensome stuff, and making nonprofits and community groups essentially jump through hoops. And that's really what it was. And then it's especially cruel because it wasn't like, hey, jump through all these hoops, and then you get money at the end. Literally, you had nonprofits jumping through hoops, and at the end there was no money, which is especially wicked when you consider, nonprofit organizations, community-based groups aren't necessarily swimming in cash. So any request for a proposal, any application, that's manpower, that's hours, that's time that could have been spent doing something else that, could have been producing revenue or addressing the community. So it's really a tragedy in a way. And I think that's something, as we hit this deadline today, there was discussions in the council, but we have yet to hear truly from community groups that you had community groups that, I mean, it's one thing to promise money and take it away. It's the other thing, you have organizations that, have been planning, right? So if the city says, hey, we're going to give you $10 million, right? You kind of trust the city that, okay, that's the thing. The city's telling us we're going to get $10 million. We need to plan to get that money, because you can't just say, okay, well, when we get that money, we'll plan it. You'd need to plan a time. So you had organizations, redoing their strategic plans, thinking through programming, trying to be ready for when that money hit their coffers, so they could use it to address issues. And even yesterday, yesterday at the special meeting, the acting mayor was stating, if anyone promised you money and you didn't get it, let us know. We're going to make you whole. We're going to, find a way to get you money. And I think I just saw a Twitter story today that the Naval Park downtown, somebody asked them, hey, did you know that you're not getting that American Rescue Plan money? And the person from the Naval Park said, that's the first time I'm hearing from it. You're more in the know than me. So I think this is something where today is the deadline, but I think the ramifications of this are going to keep, this is a slow developing story, because we're really just, this past week was like pulling the curtain back and seeing really, I mean, the incompetency, the negligence, the lack of preparation, lack of oversight, just everything. It was really like watching a nightmare, because you had a couple, there was a caucus meeting before the regular meeting where, you had city staff asking or answering questions from the council members. And you had staff members that, right, these are people that we're supposed to know. And a lot of it was just, I don't know. I'll have to get back to you. And nobody had answers. The common council had questions, and no one had answers. So it was, I think there was even a moment yesterday where some common council members literally admitted, we're hoping and praying that we don't get this money clawed back, because essentially you had Mayor Brown and his staff. I don't know who was involved. I think there was very few people, but they were administrating the funds. And then when Byron Brown stepped aside, right, it doesn't sound like there's much documentation, and he was kind of the leader of this American Rescue Plan, and he knew everything or where it was. And I mean, just yesterday, so yesterday was December 30th, so 2 days before the deadline. I was at the Common Council for my civil service item, so I was at that meeting at 9:45. I get there, and then afterwards I just sat through the finance committee meeting, and I just was checking my Twitter, and somebody tweeted there's a special meeting on the council's agenda for 2:30, but no agenda up there, having a special meeting. So people were speculating, is this American Rescue Plan related? And turns out it was. So the acting mayor held a special meeting with like 4 hours notice, where the Amendment 7 essentially said, City Hall workers, were double and triple checking the numbers, and they found these contracts which were executed but were not entered into the city's accounting system. So we need to do this final amendment. I know, last week it was the final amendment, but we need to do this one because there was an error. So it just felt right when you say that, executed contracts were not entered into the accounting system. That's a sentence, but that is not the end of the paragraph. There's more meat on the bone to be fleshed out there, right? What do you mean executed contracts weren't entered into the accounting system? And these are 4. So it was only 4 contracts that weren't executed. And what do you mean? What do you mean executed contracts weren't entered into the accounting system? That is a whole other. That's a wormhole that has yet to be explored. Of what exactly does that mean there? That's not a closing statement. That is the yeah. I have questions there. So essentially, you had council members, and then the item gets put up for a vote, and nobody has any information. They're just hoping. I think they had brought in Drescher and Malecki, who is a local accounting firm, and they've been auditing. So the acting mayor has said, "Oh yeah, I brought in these city audit or this outside accounting firm to audit." So a lot of the language was around, oh, can we see the audit? Can we see the audit? And it turns out that this accounting firm was just working side by side with staff and hadn't produced any sort of report, had just been kind of sifting through the program and trying to understand. I mean, the acting mayor had mentioned some sort of tracking system. I don't know what that means. Is that an Excel sheet that somebody color coded? But it was an absolute mess, because you had the Common Council voting on an amendment that they had no information on, or just kind of taking the acting mayor for his word and hoping that the staff caught everything and that there's no more contracts that were not entered into the accounting system. That's really, yeah, there was a lot to. And even, one of my big concerns that I had posted about on social media is that the actual 177.5 million that I calculated that was technically allocated, so is in the original plan and the amendments, that number does not match up with what's reported in the city budgets. So when I looked at the city fiscal year 25 budget, I added up what was there. So if you go in the city budget, there's a line called one of the categories of revenue for the city's budget is intergovernmental. So that's things like transfers from state, county, federal governments. So that's the broader category. So under intergovernmental, there was a budget line called federal revenue stimulus, which from my research, I believe that is, the stimulus money revenue in the revenue budget. And I added up what was reported on the official actual numbers from the city budget, and that added up to 188 million. So 11 million more than what the American Rescue Plan allocated. That doesn't even include, so the fiscal year 25 budget was developed in like late May. So they had a year, so they reported fiscal year 24 as year to date. But when I looked at the comptroller's cash flow report from May 2024, they had projected that $30 million was going to be, applied in June. So I was curious, and when I pulled that data from Open Data, it looked like fiscal month June 2024 had an additional $42 million. So if you include that $42 million that's on Open Data, that I believe represents what was projected $30 million in the comptroller's report, but wasn't reported in the fiscal year budget because they were just doing year to date. They didn't include the very end of the year. That number was north of 200 million. I think it was $33 million. So yeah, just a massive number that's on the city budget, and I could be wrong about what it was, but based on my research information, I believe that is the budget line, right? If the city spent $177 million on revenue replacement, that has to be reported somewhere on the budget. That's from my research. So yeah, and my number is just my number, right? There's not like City Hall had a number. You had the mayor, the council, the comptroller all had different numbers, and it's just there's no consensus on what the truth is, which is concerning because, yeah, it's concerning because the big issue here is today's the deadline to obligate. So, if we get in a situation where even a month or week from now we find out that money was spent in other categories, technically that the federal government could come and claw that money back because you didn't properly allocate it. And yeah, so which is an issue, right? If they don't get this right, there's a potential that the city could be required to pay back money that it doesn't have because they've, again, using the analogy, they've flushed it down the toilet. Once you flush it down the toilet, you can't unflush it. That was one of the concerning things. I think the acting mayor, excuse me, I burped there, but yeah, one of the things the acting mayor was saying at yesterday's special meeting was that, if any community groups, if you were promised money, you didn't get it, let us know. Let us know. We're going to make you whole. We're going to make sure that you get your money, which sounds great, but the city just had $330 million in their coffers and they couldn't get the money. So now that money's been flushed on the toilet, how are you going to get the money? That was unclear. It just really felt like an empty promise and more something to placate the community groups. And we have another comment here from Candace. She says, "Wow." So yeah, I think that's the general consensus of anybody that's paying attention, or even if you're not paying attention, is like, it's been a wow kind of, I mean, after they voted on the Fourth Amendment, my jaw was like on the floor. Like I was genuinely like aghast at what they were doing. Cause I think there's a general consensus, right? I think, not to get too demeaning, but I think people in Buffalo, we generally think, oh, our city officials are, incompetent and corrupt and, selfish, but this was like a whole other level. It was really like, oh, nobody knows what's going on. There's no staff member. There's no one in the building that knows anything because the only person that knows anything, quit halfway through their term. And it was really, eye-opening. It was very apparent that it's a failure on many levels, right? So there's the administration execution part, which is, really concerning. I think the Common Council, they've kind of adopted the language of throwing Mayor Byron Brown under the bus, which is completely valid, right? I think the Brown administration completely bungled this rollout and execution, and definitely shoulders a lot of the blame. But I think the Common Council, we can't allow them to skate by. They are right there, the oversight body. They have a responsibility to, oversight these things and make sure that things are being done appropriately. So for them to say, oh, it's Mayor Byron Brown's fault is true, but whose fault is it that Mayor Byron Brown was, improperly allocating these funds? It's your job to, that you ultimately have subpoena power. If there's any information you want, you can get it. So, not all the council members were there the whole time. You had a couple council members that were just elected this term, so it's not like all of them have been there the whole time. But this isn't necessarily a complete surprise. Like it's a surprise in how terrible it is a surprise in that it's even worse than we thought. But it's not a surprise. You've had community groups complaining for years now that this is an issue. Where's our funding? So it's been a concern, an ongoing concern of anyone involved that, hey, this money that was obligated isn't getting out the door. Where is it? And they've been slowly scaling it back. So it's not completely surprised, but it is a surprise at the same time. So, right, the Common Council is, where were you? Why were you not oversighting? Why were, you have the power to, go into meetings, to subpoena for information. You have a bully pulpit. You can apply pressure to the administration. And it was really, it's like there's no adults in the room. It was like, somebody gave $330 million and they had a party and, paid themselves with their budget and premium pay. And now the money is not there. And yeah, this feels like kind of the start of the story. Cause it was kind of, it's alarming. So, Essentially, yeah, that's kind of the update for now. I think we'll see. I mean, one of the things that happened last week, so ARP Amendment 6, which was December 23rd, essentially the acting mayor turned out that $11 million that was supposed to be spent on replacing lead pipelines. So replacing old, I think what they called it roll, technically, replacing old lead lines was one of the so $11 million that was in the original plan. That money was given to the city's water board to replace old lead lines. And then the acting mayor files this amendment saying, yeah, I know that the Common Council, right, the city of Buffalo citizens, elected officials voted to and approved for this money to be spent on lead lines. But after my staff looking at the numbers, that money was given to the water board to do that, and they didn't spend it on that. They spent it, or no, I'm sorry. They spent the money on replacing old lead lines when that money was supposed to be spent on sewer arrears and sewer forgiveness. So the Common Council officially adopted and approved $11 million to be spent to forgive water arrears, so water bills of city homeowners. And instead of spending that on arrears for homeowners, that money was improperly spent on lead lines. And lead lines was another approved category, but the specific $11 million was supposed to be spent on homeowner water arrears, and that was spent on lead lines instead. But lead lines was a previous thing. So it was kind of this bumbling thing of, the citizens' elected officials who represent the people voted to spend it on homeowner arrears, and that money was not spent on homeowner arrears. Someone at the water board just spent it on another topic, and that's a whole other wormhole of who gave the okay. How is that allowed to happen? Because again, there were 7 categories that the federal government allowed, and right, this is supposed to be transformational money that transformed the city, and right in the category of negative economic impact. So, right, it wasn't just the federal government that lost revenue, but you had lots of workers, lots of citizens that were negatively impacted too, and forgiving water arrears could have helped low to moderate income people that owned a house, and instead that money was spent on lead lines. Not saying lead lines is another very important issue in the city that needed to be addressed, and I kind of wish that more money had been spent on that. But you can't have the water board didn't have the authority to spend money on something that right, the money was earmarked for water arrears, and the water board doesn't have the authority to just make an executive decision and change that. So actually today, right before I recorded this, there was a breaking news that the acting mayor had wrote a letter to the city's outgoing water board chair to provide a detailed accounting of the water board's spending, because nobody knew what they spent it on or anything. And that's he's sending a letter to the outgoing water board chair, who is also the Buffalo Sewer Authority chair, but he is tentatively resigned to take a job in Houston to be a water engineer or city engineer down there. So he's kind of on his way out the door. So essentially we got to the deadline too, and just a bomb was dropped on the council that I know we voted to spend this money on one thing, but the water board made an executive decision to spend it on something else, and we need to change the categories to reflect that. Otherwise, the federal government could take that money back. So that was an issue, and I think right, there's need to reform the water board. I think the water board, many issues. They're going to start holding their meetings in downtown, but that's a whole other entity. It's just it's very concerning on many levels. So this is kind of an update right here. We're at the deadline, and I think I speak for all Buffalonians when I say, we hope and pray that the money was allocated, because the city cannot afford to pay back money that it doesn't have. So, right. And I think one of the issues here we face is that, this is the last day. This money has run out. So now moving forward, right, the city's been using, right, they've allocated almost 2/3 of this money to replace revenue gaps or budget gaps. And that money is no longer there. So the budget gaps can no longer be filled with American Rescue Plan money. It needs to come from somewhere. So that's a significant revenue source. And I think something that is going to be right, it is this financial reckoning that we've known is coming. I think these are the kind of the early tremors of that financial reckoning, but that is coming in this next year's fiscal year 26 budget, which will be started. It will be officially presented kind of starting in April, and May will be debating, but by the end of the year, in June, they'll adopt a new fiscal year budget. And I think it's going to be really shocking for a lot of people, because I think we are in for, there hasn't been real discussions on how we're going to address this, but essentially, I mean, one thing that seems pretty clear what they're going to do are just like massive tax increases. Yeah, and I think it's going to be, I think this last budget, the mayor had proposed 9 million or 9% tax increase, and then it got, bumped down by the council to 5%. And I think that's going to be, that we'll be wishing for those days where we only had a 5% increase. I don't want to speculate on exact percentages, but it's going to be significantly larger than even 9%. I could see, double digit tax increases, I think, and not just next year, but for the foreseeable future. I think one of the things the comptroller states is that pension costs are going to be escalating even over the projected cost. So we are in this accelerating financial cliff, because I think even you saw it with the health insurance companies this past year, like proposing 20-30% premium increases. I think just you're going to see costs for this municipality escalate significantly, and it's concerning, because ultimately I don't know if anyone in City Hall has ideas other than to raise taxes and pass on the cost to the citizens, the homeowners, the property owners. And one thing that hasn't really been discussed seriously, but I think needs to be addressed, is costs. And I think that's where maybe Buffalo Doge can come in. I think, right, looking for efficiencies, right, you got to look at both sides of the ledger. You need to increase revenues and you need to decrease costs. And right now, the only serious conversations that have been happening are around increasing revenues through increasing taxes. I think we need new innovative ways of increasing city revenue, diversifying revenue sources. But we need to seriously look at cutting costs. I know maybe about a month ago, the city administration and say that they asked each department to look for 10% to cut. And 10% has been the number, but I think we need to seriously look at even larger percentage increases. Fundamentally radical cost cutting. And I think, it needs to be addressed, but I think there's kind of a culture in City Hall that's not going to be serious, because, right, there's lots of pigs at the trough, if that makes sense, that it would ruffle feathers, and it would be, and then there's union contracts and stuff that get in the way of employee costs, but there's all sorts of, I don't know, it's we need to look for ways to cut costs in addition to revenues, which is one of the most disappointing things, right? Or I think the mayor's initial plan, when they had cited justification for using at that time $100 million for revenue replacement, they had cited a report from the Brookings Institute that said that was a best practice and recommendation. But the exact language from the Brookings Institute said that cities should use the revenue replacement to stabilize their operating budgets, which is something that's like the even more tragic thing of this whole thing, is that the city just spent nearly 2/3 of the rescue plans on revenue replacement. And while they did nothing to help stabilize the budget, right? They could have been using, and they should have been, right? That was the recommendation, is to use the rescue plan to plug budget gaps while addressing the underlying budget. And what we essentially had is they were replacing revenues, using the money to replace revenues, but just kicking the can down the road, which is kind of even the emerging tragedy is not just that they didn't spend it on community things, infrastructure things, but that they used most of the money for budgetary gap and then didn't do anything to address the budget gap. So instead of kind of a smooth transition into some sort of post-American Rescue Plan budget, we are now facing a dire cliff, right? It's it's a rug pull, as the youngins would say. We've been rug pulled, but even in a rug pull, right? A rug pull is kind of when it's a very drastic, immediate thing that this has been a slow motion rug pull of, we've known for years now that this money was not going to be here post 2024, and now here we are, we're at the cliff, and I don't know if they'll be able to kick the can down the line. So that's a little bit of ranting from in the moment. This is right. We are now, as I record this, 3.5 hours from the technical deadline. So hoping and praying that all the city staff caught every penny, because if I were a betting man, I'd bet on that they didn't, and that there'll be more things that will leak out. But hoping and praying for all Buffalonians, and that isn't true, and that doesn't happen. And yeah, there's much more. I think this is an emerging story, and this is just really the start. But that's my initial kind of reactions in the moment, as I just witnessed what I witnessed this past week. And I think, there's definitely more, because it's kind of definitely a soul searching kind of moment of it. It made me realize, I think I spent a couple hours over the weekend just, becoming informed, trying to research the American Rescue Plan, grasp what was going on. And when I got to the chambers and just watched them debate, it was very clear to me that even some of the council were very uninformed and ignorant of even what the federal guidelines were, which is to me was this what I don't know. It's just you had I was just speechless as I am now. Of wait, you're a board of director you're the board of directors for the city. You've been doing oversight for multiple years, right? You're familiar with federal guidelines, and it was, and not to throw the council under the bus. I mean, I am, but yes, but it was just what I saw this week. I can't unsee, and it was more than nature of systemic. It was no city staff, no councils, nobody. Just nobody knew anything. Nobody knew where $331 million were, and I don't know. It was something, as I said, I can't unsee what I've seen, and just made me really feel like not just myself, but we all need to be more, right? I spent a couple of hours over the weekend on my free time, researching, and it seemed like I did more research than any of the council members, but we all need to chip in a little bit, even if, there's a lot that needs to be oversight. And I think, that's why I'm excited to work with Buffalo Doge. And I think all of us, right? There's many of us and it's very clear to me after that we all need to get a little more involved and see a little more and participate more and carry just our little bit of the load, because we're in for a reckoning. So that's ramblings of an ARPA auditor. There'll be more for that, but that'll be all for now. Okay, so I want to pivot into let's pivot into the civil service. So before all this ARPA stuff was going on, I had the opportunity to finally speak at a council meeting. So I had filed an item with the City of Buffalo's Civil Service Committee, and was able to speak at a meeting. So I filed an item, I think it was 24-2175, called Concerns about the Provisional Pipelines of the City's Civil Service System. So long story short, for those of you that aren't familiar with my backstory, but I am a former City of Buffalo City Hall worker, and I was terminated effective immediately. I was the city's open data and analytics project coordinator, and I was fired after 18 months. So my appointment to that position of open data and analytics project coordinator was a provisional appointment. So a provisional appointment is a type of kind of temporary appointment that is used to fill a position while a civil service exam before a civil service exam is offered. So part of the City of Buffalo's classified rules of civil service, Rule 16.4 is around provisionals, and it states that no provisional appointment shall last more than 9 months, and the Commissioner of Human Resources should offer a civil service exam to make sure that no provisional appointment lasts more than 9 months. And as I said, I served an 18-month appointment. So my appointment was 18 months before it was terminated, and it was before I was terminated, it was an indefinite appointment. So I filed an item because, based on my lived experience, and after doing some auditing of the city's payroll, it's my belief that I'm not unique. There's many City Hall employees that are in provisional appointments that have extended beyond 9 months because the Human Resources Commissioner has not offered a civil service exam, and this Department of Human Resources does not maintain eligibility lists. So they're keeping, right? I think based on my research, just in the Office of Strategic Planning, there's upon information and belief 10 employees that are currently, right now as we speak, in provisional appointments that are beyond 9 months because no civil service exam was taken, and that's just one department. For example, there's some general planners, the city's climate action manager. There's an architect, that have all been in these appointments. I'm concerned because by keeping city hall workers provisional beyond 9 months, their rights are infringed. So the collective bargaining rights, right A of the collective bargaining agreement between the city of Buffalo and local AFS CME 650 states that no city employee shall be served Section 75 termination proceedings. And the thing is, if you're provisional, you don't get Section 75 termination proceedings. So essentially, by keeping people provisional, it gives the mayor's executive branch and commissioners the ability to terminate at will civil servants, which is not, that's right. If the civil service law, that shouldn't be a thing because you have to hold civil service exams, and I'm all concerned too of not just are the rights being infringed, but actually on the front end of the provisional pipeline, as I call it. Section 1.2 of the collective bargaining agreement, it states that no dues shall be deducted without an authorization form on file. And it was my lived experience, and I foiled and found at least two other employees, and then the comptroller stopped responding to my FOIL requests for authorization forms. But I'm concerned that the city might be deducting dues from employees with no authorization forms. Essentially, provisionals are being forced to be put into a union where while they're paying full dues, are only getting partial rights, and then they don't have the option to refrain, which is when you look at the public employees like Bill of Rights, or there's some New York law that's around public employment, and all public employees have the right to refrain from participating in employee organizations. So provisionals actually should have the right, or they do have the right to refrain from joining the union if they so choose. And I believe that right would actually be exercised if they were aware that not only do they not have the full Bill of Rights, but that the whole Article 20 discipline and discharge proceedings don't apply to them because of their provisional status, because the collective bargaining agreements dispute and discharge section only applies to permanent employees. So people who have taken and passed a permanent or a civil service exam, then you become a permanent employee, which is concerning. And then there's other things too. I mean, I'm specifically concerned with Tracy Healy, she's both a city hall employee, so she works in the city's civil service division as a personnel specialist one, where part of her responsibility is helping with civil service exams. But then the other hat she wears is she's the actual local AFS CME 650 president. So this puts her in a conflict of interest because as the union president, she is on the grievance committee for every single city department. So if any provisional employee wanted to file a grievance to get a civil service exam, that would put her in the position of having to investigate herself. And then the whole grievance, right, the grievance section in the CBA, it requires, interfacing with the Commissioner of Human Resources, who also is her direct supervisor because she's also a civil service employee. And it was my experience that I think during my employment, I had filed a grievance that I don't believe that it followed the proper grievance procedures, but I believe part of the reason I was terminated, part of my perception is that it was retaliation for me filing a grievance and complaining about no civil service exam. Because after I had filed my grievance, I went back to my union president, Tracy Healy, and just to talk to her about it. And her words that she said to me that, put chills in my bones, she said, "You need to slow your march down." And yeah, that was like a chilling moment, and I didn't understand at the time, but as I've been terminated, put that together. So yeah, I had the opportunity to speak, and it was amicable. I don't know if anything came of my speech, and it's on the council Facebook page if you so want to search it. But I did my best to kind of explain it best I could. I thought I did okay. I was kind of muttering a little bit, but we'll see. I guess I'm concerned because I think the city hall, right, especially after seeing this ARPA thing of like just seeing how incompetent and the whole thing is, I think it's part of that is downstream of the violation of this provisional law because one, if you're not holding civil service exams, you're not doing competency based hiring. You have no proof that these people you're appointing are the most competent people for the job, because these could be. And part of my experience was I was an outsider, right? When I was appointed to city hall, I'm not the nephew or niece or brother or sister of anyone in that building. It was my experience, right? The first person after I was hired was the daughter of someone in my department. So, it's just, if you're not holding civil service exams, it allows the ability for the administration to appoint, friends and families and maybe the people that aren't the most competent. And especially as we face this fiscal crisis where we don't have enough money, we can no longer afford to just give our friends and family jobs. We need the most competent people in their roles, and we do that through civil service exams, to be fair. And so I'm concerned, on that end, that right now competency-based hiring, but also I think it creates a culture of fear. Whereas if most of the workforce, right, it's a caste system, right? At the top of the hierarchy is the mayor and the common council, who's elected by the people. They're at the top of the hierarchy. Then you have the exempt employees, who are commissioners, people appointed by the elected officials, and then below them you have permanent employees, who are civil servants that have taken civil service exams, proved that their competency through civil service exams, and have protections. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, you have the provisionals, who are temporary, have partial rights, can be fired at will. They're at the bottom of the hierarchy. And I think if you keep employees provisional, what it does is it expands executive power. So it gives, instead of civil service exams determining, the civil service system and who are working the jobs, it gives, the mayor and the exempt commissioners the ability to hire and fire at will, which is that wasn't the intention. That's not how the civil service system is supposed to work. And also creates a culture of fear of, for the provisionals, even if you are a competent person, if you know you can be fired at will, based on my experience is that, right. And I think my personal experience, I was a provisional, and I was brought on to help with the city's SaaS analytics contract. So I was actually the back end technical person, to help send the SaaS Institute, which was part of a data analytics contract with the police department. So I was brought in to help with the technical aspects of sending SaaS and automating the scripts and sending them data. And it was very clear to me that project was not going well. I mean, it's 4 or 5 years I've spoken about this publicly, but the SaaS Institute contract, the city spent $2.2 million, and results of that have never been made public, even though it was part of this data transparency thing. As part of the city's police reform agenda after the murder of George Floyd. So it was very clear to me that project was not going well. And I ended up, part of my perception of why I was fired was around civil service exams, but also the reason another perception of why I believe I was ultimately terminated is because I seemed to be the only person that was concerned that the SaaS contract was not going well. And I had gone to my direct supervisor and commissioner with my concerns and was kind of scoffed at. So I think part of the reason I was fired was not, if they told you I wasn't competent, they're lying. But I think part of the reason I was fired was because I wasn't just willing to put my head down and go along with it. And it just, right, I'm not unique. I think I have one little view of City Hall, and I think that's just one example of if everyone can be fired at will, then no one speaks up about things like the SAS Institute or other things. There's obviously at this point between the ARP plan, I even think some of the employees on the American Rescue Plan technical webinar were provisionals. So if any of them saw anything, they don't have the ability to speak up, and it just creates this top-down culture where it's the mayors are getting in line. And that's kind of a rambling, but I think a lot of the incompetency and corruption is downstream of, right? City Hall is not some monolith. It's people doing work, people making decisions, and those people, right? Ultimately, the buck stops with the people, not just the elected officials, but the actual people doing the work at City Hall. And if those people in City Hall, right, if they're incompetent, or if I don't know, those people are making decisions. So when you see the city, bungling $330 million, it's people that did that. We need to make sure that, one, the city of Buffalo taxpayer has the most competent people in all the positions. And that, two, we give those competent people some sort of protection where they can't just be fired because the commissioner doesn't like them. In my case, I wasn't sassy enough for them. And they wish I had just gone along with the sass. So you need people that are competent, but you also need to give people protection to be able to be courageous and to speak out and to do the job, doing jobs the best you can. If you're just saying, yes, sir, okay, sir, yeah, I didn't see that, head in the stern, you're not doing the best job. So you need to give, the best people in the city the ability to do their job the best they can. And by violating provisional employment law, it kind of explains why no one in the building knows anything that's going on, because the people that don't want to speak up because they'll be fired if they do. And we'll see. I'm optimistic. I think I'm cautiously optimistic that anything will come of it. I seem to be the only one that will care. And obviously it ruffles a lot of feathers, right? A lot of the provisionals, right, they're either incompetent and wouldn't get the job because they wouldn't do good on the civil service exam, or two, they are super competent and have no protection. So it's kind of this tricky thing of, I don't know, and just knowing the culture, it's concerning on multiple levels. So I'm not sure if anything will happen, but given my interactions with council member Rashid Wyatt, who is the University District Council member and the chair of the civil service, my interactions with him have been positive, and I think he is taking it right now seriously. And I think there was a couple other, I could tell council member Zanetta Everhart with Maston, she seemed to be paying attention while I was speaking. Leah Halton Pope from Ellicott seemed to be paying attention. David Rivera from Niagara District seemed to be asleep at the wheel. I don't think he turned and looked at me. But I think with Mayor Byron Brown leaving, I think there's some understanding that there's a lot of stuff that's wrong that needs to be fixed. And I think hopefully me pointing this out could just be one thing, because ultimately we have laws in the book that just need to be followed. And we'll see. They want to call in the human resources department to have them tell their side of the story. And I totally get that. I'm just some random person with an opinion. I think, right, this isn't a legal system yet, but we have, our society is based on two sides of the story. So I could be wrong too, because I'm not a civil service worker. I don't know the banals of civil service law. I just know my lived experience and my perceptions and interpretations. So I do hope that the human resources comes to the council chamber and gives their side of the story, because I could be wrong on some things, but I think I've hit the point on a lot of things. I'm also optimistic, and I'm not ignorant enough that I don't think anyone from human resources will come to the chambers. So I'd hate to see this get swept under the rug. But I do want to briefly just put on the record that my item is specifically focused on Tracy Healy. I think that's somewhere where I'm not willing to concede. I believe that Tracy Healy is a major player she is. My mama told me not to say anything bad about anyone, if you don't know anything, but I will say that my perception is that Tracy Healy lacks integrity. And that's all I'll say. Based on my experience of her representing me, and I say representing, I did not get representation from her. And my perceptions and how I perceive her is that she is, she lacks integrity. And she was my union president, and ultimately I believe she didn't represent me, and she told me she had my back, and ultimately I believe it was her that stabbed me in the back, as I believe it was my union president, Tracy Healy, that instigated my termination when she confronted me in the council chambers under the pillars of knowledge, industry, and fortitude a week prior to my termination. So I believe she's a major player in a lot of the operations. And when you look at even, I think it was in 2010 when she was the city's director of compensation and benefits, she had to resign to take another position because She got caught passing dead people's health insurance claims around, which I don't know the backstory, but just knowing she was somewhat involved in that. And yeah, the recent story where some fire clerk was working a 50-50 job where she hadn't reported to work in like 7 years, but made $500,000, and who was her union representative? Oh, Tracy Healy. So when you even look at, how is the city deducting wages from provisionals when they've never got any forms to do that? How would they even know who to deduct wages from? And ultimately, somebody from HR had to tell them to deduct wages from people. In my case, it was me. And did file an item where I found her. She did steal my wages. She called it a dues refund, but I consider it stolen wages. And in one of her emails, she said a mistake must have been made, which is true. A mistake was made, but that was a partial truth. Is multiple mistakes were made, because I found I foiled for 2 other employees who also were missing union dues, and then I believe there's many other employees. Yeah, I'm just concerned. So I'm glad that I may get my concerns in the council chambers, because I am very strong in the position that Tracy Healy, she needs to resign from her city position. I think that would be an immediate remedy to help unclog the provisional pipelines of the city. And I know I have some elementary plumbing knowledge, but when a galvanized pipe is corroded and when it's rusted and water's not moving, you don't try to sand it, or right, you cut it out and you replace it with a new line. I think that's what we need to do with provisional pipelines. And I think one way you would get the provisionals flowing, right, from provisional status into permanent status and getting civil service exams would be by cutting Tracy Healy out of the city. Cutting her out, allow her to represent employees, but don't give her... Right now, we have a civil service system where Tracy Healy essentially acts as judge, jury, and executioner, and our civil service budget shouldn't hinge on whether Tracy Healy likes you or not. It should be on whether, are you competent for the job, and do you work hard? Do you have courage? It shouldn't be, Tracy Healy's opinion shouldn't have anything to do with, who's running the city, because it's been running that way, and look where we are with the American Rescue Plan. So that's the ramblings of an ARPA auditor, and I'll provide more updates on my civil service item as that's also in motion. But Happy New Year to everybody watching, and let's hope that those city employees, double caught and triple caught all the ARPA money. So I'll see you next year, and thanks for tuning in. This is Buffalo Doge. This has been an audit of ARPA. Till next year, we will fade to darkness.